Okay, my name is Ron Carrico. I'm at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. Today is April the
30th,
2014, and I'm sitting with Frank Murray in Gardnerville, Nevada. And Frank was well, amongst all the other things he flew in his 30 years of the Air Force, he flew the A-12, the CIA spy plane from the early to late 60s. So we're going to ask some questions here, and I'm going to start off with, where were you born?
Omaha, Nebraska.
And just out of curiosity, what did your parents do for a living?
I was an Army brat. My father was professional Army. My mom was even in the Army as a nurse.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so they both outranked me until I made captain.
Now you went to high school where?
San Diego.
And
St. Augustine High in San Diego.
okay. And after that, you joined the Air Force.
Right out of high school at age 17, I was away into the Air Force where I joined to get some training I needed, or thought I needed.
In what respect?
I wanted to get the GI Bill, which the War II GI Bill was still going on in '48 when I joined the Air Force. And I wanted to get that because my intention was to do a one hitch, 3 years, use the GI Bill and go to San Diego State. That was my hope.
But
and then try to get back into the Air Force to go to pilot training.
But you went to pilot training pretty much right
Without doing that, because they removed the 2-year college requirement during the Korean flap, because they just weren't getting enough volunteers, enough people to go to pilot training for the increased call for pilots.
What class were you in?
I was in 53 Charlie,
Okay,
53C.
So you were in the Air Force for quite a while before you started pilot training?
Yeah, I was about 4 years enlisted before I went to pilot training.
Okay. So where'd you go to pilot training?
2 phase, first phase Columbus, Mississippi, and the second phase Laredo, Texas.
Okay. I was in Del Rio.
Were you? I was stationed there after Laredo Gunnery School.
Yes.
Phase 1 gunnery
That
was
was F-84, right?
straight wing 84.
Yeah.
Well, F-80 there. 84s at Luke in the second phase of gunnery.
So you flew the F-80 as well, huh?
Yes.
Oh,
No,
wow.
it's a T-bird.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Well, I only flew a T-bird twice, so. So out of pilot training, you got what assignment?
First assignment was a fighter squadron in France. The 493rd Squadron of the 48th Wing was at Chaumont, France.
And what was the mission?
It was a day fighter with F-84s, Gs at first, and then shortly after I got there, maybe 6 months, we transitioned to 86F.
Now, when you say day fighter, does that mean air to air, or is that
Air to air.
not air to ground?
Primary air to air.
Okay. What were you defending against at that time in France?
We were part of the NATO force. We were part of the support force for the NATO ground forces.
Okay. So then you transitioned to F-86.
86F, yeah.
Okay, and that was the one with radar and all that, right?
No,
No?
no, the F is, you're thinking of the D.
Okay.
The radar, the interceptor, all-weather interceptor was the D. The F is the basic, same one used in Korea.
But still air to air.
Yeah.
How did you,
We also had a nuclear mission. Toward the end of my time in 86s, they trained us up on Mark 12 nuke, which was about the smallest nuke we ever made.
so was that the, did they call it Victor Alert then?
Yeah, that's right. Victor and sometimes Zulu.
Right. That was air defense with Zulu.
Yeah.
No, we said a lot of Victor Alert. Yeah. So you came back and then you transitioned to the F-101.
Well, I came back to 84F, bent wing 84s in a SAC fighter wing in Texas, which was a big step backwards from my beautiful 86 to get into bent wing 84s. 84F is not much, but shortly after that, the wing transitioned to F-101A, the single seat Voodoo. Good airplane.
Reconnaissance airplane.
No, this was a day fighter. It was the escort fighter built for SAC The original Voodoo, before the RF even, was the A model, which had 4 20-millimeter guns and
Oh, really?
that kind of thing. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
The A and the C were almost identical.
Huh, I didn't know that. So, and what was how did you align with SAC? You couldn't possibly escort the...
Well, that was the fallacy. Originally, when they had B-50s, B-29s and stuff, the fighter force, which was mostly 84s, could keep up with or outrun the bomber stream easy.
Right.
But later on, when they went to 47s and 36s, 47s and 52s, they could run along with the fighters or outrun them in some cases. So they sure had more legs.
Yeah.
So it wasn't long after that they did away with the fighter escort idea.
So when you flew the F-101, where did you fly it? Where were you flying out of?
Started at Bergstrom in Austin
Okay.
in the A model, A and C, same thing. And after my tour there, I ended up in ADC at Otis, and they got the first F-101Bs.
That's a two-seater.
That's a 2-seater interceptor version with missiles, no guns.
Okay. When you flew and so flying out of, what was that mission?
Otis.
Out of Otis, yeah.
Out of Otis, it was air defense mission, Air Defense Command.
Sitting alert and...
Same old things, alert barns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How long did you do that?
5 years, 94C at first. Again, I got to fly some, that's a T-bird with overdrive and television, the 94. And did that for a few months. And they kept those on until they could get the first 101s in service. And
Right.
they put those at the 60th fighter at Otis. And I got into the B model. They had a much bigger engine.
Yeah.
The 94C is the one I flew.
Right.
Had a J-48 with afterburner. Yeah, pretty decent airplane.
Yeah.
Didn't have any legs. If you poked it in burner, it emptied the tanks right now.
Yeah.
So it was a point-to-point defense airplane, but
Yeah.
it did what it was designed to do.
Yep.
94 is a nice airplane. I enjoyed it.
So now, when you got out of the 101, you went to the Oxcart program.
Yeah, when I got on to Oxcart, I was answering.
Let's talk about that name for a minute. What the heck? Where did that come from?
I don't know where Oxcart came from. I was told it just came out of a grab bag of project names. It could have been Wheelbarrow or something else. It just happened to be Oxcart was the next name up, I guess.
And so, but then the Oxcart, it's the program and it's also the airplane.
No,
No?
the airplane's Cygnus.
Oh,
The airplane name is Cygnus,
Oh, no
after
kidding.
the swan.
oh, I didn't know.
Cygnus, yeah. That's the airplane name, Cygnus.
Okay, I
And
didn't know. that.
Oxcart was the name of the project, the whole program. Like Senior Crown was the name of the project for the SR-71. Senior Crown was its
Right.
project name. Oxcart was the agency's
Okay.
project name.
So when did you become first aware of?
When I volunteered to what ultimately ended up being a part of Oxcart, I was answering an ad on the bulletin board asking for people to apply for a NASA chase pilot position. And it required a certain amount of supersonic time and fighter time and all of that. So I answered that request, and I had orders to Alaska when that happened. And I told them I've got orders to go to Elmendorf to fly Deuces, 102s.
Right.
And they said, doesn't make any difference. If we want you on this, we'll take you and cancel the other ones. Okay? And pretty soon that happened. But when I first went on Oxcart, it was not to be an A-12 pilot.
So now, when was it you actually joined the program then?
63, the summer of 63.
And but you were flying 101s.
I was current in the 101, yeah.
Which one?
The 101B,
Okay.
which happened to be the chase airplane
Okay.
they used on Oxcart.
So when did you first become aware of what you were going to be doing?
When I got on the base, I had no idea that an A-12 existed. Nobody ever told me anything about it. They just said, classified job, go to work.
And where was the base?
Area 51.
But you didn't actually live at Area 51, though.
No,
Where'd you live?
I spent 5 days a week up there though.
Where'd you live?
Lived in Las Vegas at that time with my family.
And of course, your wife probably had no idea what you were doing.
She had no idea what the hell I was doing.
So what did you do as a chase pilot?
Well, they were photo chasing the airplane in the development years. In the first few years, they had a chase on every sortie, and we were along to photograph what was happening to the thing as best we could, within our speed limit.
What was your speed limit?
101, 16, 17
Okay.
Mach number. So
did they?
But it soon outran you, of course. When it started accelerating, it was gone, and that was the end of the photo shot.
So now I know the SR they would push over to go through the Mach to the transit.
Yeah,
You did the
the
same thing.
Whifferdale. Yeah, same maneuver we did. It's just the quickest way to get it supersonic.
So was it sort of a thing where you would often sort of a distant formation and you do the same thing and it's
Yeah, we'd go with him the best we could, and we could stay with him in the Axel maneuver until he got to about 14, 15, and then the A-12 was gone.
and you were pooped out?
We went back to the tanker and hung around and see if he was going to come back.
How many missions did you fly like that?
As Chase?
Yeah.
I don't know. I was there 5 years. I did it the entire time I was there, plus flying the A-12.
Well, so you did both.
Yeah, but I was flying 4 different airplanes when I was at 51. I was
Really?
flying the T-Bird, the 101, the A-12, and the little light Cessna that we had for utility. So I got to fly 4 different airplanes.
So when you're flying the chase, were you in the CIA then?
Yes.
Okay.
I got recruited into the CIA about halfway through my 5-year tour at Area 51 when they asked me if I wanted to fly the A-12. And of course I said, throw me in that briar patch. So I had to resign my commission in the Air Force, as did all the other guys that were flying the A-12.
So nothing changed though. The pay was the same and all that.
No, it was the same as the U-2 pilots flew for the agency. No, it was a little better than Air Force pay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And it counted towards retirement and all that, I guess.
Yeah, it's federal service.
Yeah. Okay. So you ended up with what, 29 or 30 years?
29.
And how come you left with one more year to go? You could have got that extra 2.5%.
No, I didn't care. Well, I was posted for another unaccompanied tour, and I'd had all the unaccompanied tours I could stand. So I said, no, I think I'll just go ahead and retire.
Where were they going to send you?
Thule, Greenland.
Oh, Jesus. Well, you made somebody mad along the
Yeah,
way.
I think so. Yeah, I got them chapped.
Well, you got to fly all the best airplanes, but then along the way.
I managed that.
Yeah, then along the way, the finally
Yeah.
runs out.
Yeah.
Well, I've just been amazed at how many guys who were, combat aces and things like that, they never make very high rank. Because they're
No.
too independent.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I was, even at the time I retired, I was still a high school kid. I never did get to college.
Oh,
I got so many adventures going for me that it didn't include classroom.
yeah.
They wanted an aviator. They didn't care. He had to be able to fly well, but they didn't care about how well he did in history and economics.
It's still not that important, is it? When you really think
Probably not if what you want is an aviator.
Well, I mean, look at all the things
Unless you require an engineering degree or something
Well,
to do the job.
maybe for
The airplane was ready. The State Department was not ready.
right,
They were the holdback. The agency wanted to put the airplane to work.
right.
We had plans to use it in Cuba before that, before Southeast Asia, and they still wouldn't do it.
But I couldn't figure this most recent release somebody sent me. It was from September last year. I could not tell whether they actually overflew Cuba or not.
No, we didn't.
Wow.
We never did. We were ready. That was I don't remember the project name to do that, but we were ready to go do that. Even when we hadn't really reached 3.2 Mach yet in operation. We were still diddling around at about 2.8.
Why?
Because the inlet control system was not working as advertised yet, and it wasn't stable, And by the time they got that going, then it moved on out from 2.8 to 3.2 right away. But then state really was the holdback of using this thing anywhere in the world, really. They put a hold on it, and they convinced the presidential's advisors and those that this thing was not needed.
So primarily what you were doing was, for that first 5 years, it was mostly
Development and training.
and with a lot to learn.
Yes, but the airplane was a brand new idea. It wasn't, reheat of somebody else's idea. It was a all new ball game.
Did you ever meet Kelly Johnson?
Sure.
I mean, did you work with him at all, or
He used to come to the area frequently.
what was he like?
I didn't get that close to him. I listened to his chalk talks and stuff like that. He was a very smart man, of course. And, I had nothing socially to do with the guy.
Yeah.
He knew he had pilots up there, but he didn't chase it much.
Yeah. Well, I probably didn't care.
Oh, he cared. He cared much about his airplane, and he cared about the people that were flying his airplane. But
Well, when they lost the drone, when that thing came apart, he canceled the whole idea right then.
well, yeah, it was too hairy.
Yeah.
That was just the first incident. Had he gone on with it, that would have happened a few more times, and pretty soon it'd be tough.
But they actually did launch some drones that actually
Oh, yeah.
flew to China.
No,
Yeah.
not off the A-12. They launched those off the B-52. Tagboard was the project name
Right.
for the drone carry on an A-12.
Yeah.
And that went until the first midair. And then they made the modified the drone to be launched with a booster rocket off of the pylon of a B-52.
So the one that they lost, when they there was the M and the D. What I can't remember, it was mother and then
Mother-daughter.
Mother-daughter. Okay.
Yeah,
And so there was a collision when the thing launched.
that's right.
Yeah.
On the light off and launch of the drone on the last launch,
Right.
the drone banked left right at launch and took off the rudder
Oh,
and the engine on the left side, and everything went to pot after that.
Yeah. Were they at altitude and high speed?
Yes, they were at launch speed. They were at Mach 3 plus.
Wow. And back seater made it, but the front seater didn't. Is that right?
No, they both got out of the airplane,
Yeah.
but the back seater, the LCO, the launch control guy, ended up drowning,
Yeah.
and for some reason, and Bill Park, the pilot,
Right.
made it okay
Yeah.
out of that one.
You say it had 32,500 pounds of thrust per engine, and how much fuel did it carry when you took off?
Well, we took off with about half a load.
And the reason why?
The tires were the limiting factor. The tires would blow out if you put a full fuel load on the airplane and tried to take off. As you rotated the airplane, as a delta, you're pushing down on the main wheels to rotate the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Up elevon pushes down on the mains, raises the nose.
Right.
That overloaded what the tires could take, and the tires several times blew out on rotation.
And these tires were impregnated with aluminum, were they?
No, that was only a coating. That was
Okay.
a paint
Okay.
on the outside of this, mostly on the sidewall. As soon as you rolled a little bit, it came off the tread right now.
Did they run very high pressure in the tires?
They ran about 375 pounds of nitrogen gas in the tire.
And how many ply?
22 ply.
Wow.
I have one of those tires in the garage. It's a worn one, very worn.
So then when did you take off with full power?
Yes,
And the takeoff roll was?
typical 5,500 feet, somewhere like that, at area 51, which is about 4,000 feet in the air.
Mm-hmm. So now takeoff speed was generally 220, something like that?
Yeah, lift off about 215, rotate about 200 knots.
Mm-hmm. And then was there a program? Well, let's see, I guess, did you always just go and hit the tanker first?
Yes.
Okay. So how did you climb out? What kind of climb out speed and all that?
Well, just going to the tanker, we just cruise out at 300, 350
How'd you find
knots.
How'd you find the tanker?
We knew where he was.
Well, I mean, did you have radar? I guess is what I'm
No,
asking.
we had no radar. We had a beacon that we could turn on that he could see on his radar.
Okay.
So he could see us, and until we got within visual range of him, we didn't know, we couldn't see it.
Did he? So then you would come in at,
1,000 feet below his holding altitude.
and would he turn in front of you?
He'd make a turn to roll out in front of us, yes.
Okay. And so their navigator was calling the turn and all that, I guess.
Well, we didn't talk. We made radio silent rendezvous. Practiced only in emergency would we say something.
Okay.
Until we got on the boom. And when you got on the boom, then the boomer would talk to you through the boom interphone.
Okay. Now so now after you come off the tank, you're now filled up and you've got 80,000 pounds?
68,000 pounds
68,000.
is full
Okay.
for the A-12.
So you got 68,000 pounds, now what do?
Go through the, as we called it, the Whifferdale Axel maneuver.
Which is?
Climb dive. We'd come off the tanker and climb up at 0.9 Mach number until the rate of climb reduced to about 1,000 feet per minute. And when it got to that point, it wasn't any need of going any higher because you were going to slow down and stop.
Right.
So then we would bunt, push over at a half positive G, and dive the airplane on the back side of that maneuver, up to about a 10-degree dive. At which time, during the unload pushover thing, the airplane would normally go supersonic and get past that high drag transonic range.
Mm-hmm.
And down the backside in that dive, when you got to about 1.4 or something, 1.4 Mach, then you'd start to pull out and level out again about 30,000, about where you started. Except now you're supersonic and the inlet starts to work at 1.6. Spike starts back, doors, bypass doors start to modulate, and away you go for
Stop
climb.
right there for a second. Is that the point when the doors start to modulate and then the spike starts to move? Is that when it sort of becomes a ramjet?
No,
Partial ramjet?
no.
Okay.
It's a regular turbojet at that point.
Okay.
You've got to get to reset speed, which is up around 2.4, 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
And get into bypass on the engine. When the engine goes into bleed bypass, then it technically becomes more or less a turbo ramjet.
Okay, so now you've dived, now you've started your climb, and is there a set climb speed you climb?
Yeah, after a while, after the airplane proved itself, we climbed at 450 knots equivalent. 450 keys.
Yeah.
And we engaged the autopilot in the climb too.
Oh, really?
And engaged keys hold, which made it easy to do.
Yeah.
Then auto nav, so it would make the track by itself. It's not going to work right if you try to climb it too slow. And it works better getting the inlet to work quicker and get into the excess thrust regime, which happens because of a working inlet.
So now when you say excess thrust regime, you mean when the bypasses are open and now it's becoming a...
Now the bypasses open and close auto to maintain two things. I got to start again. The spike is positioned to hold a shock in the appropriate part of the lip of the inlet.
Right.
Doing so creates high duct pressure. If it's more than the engine can stand in the plenum chamber, which is the area in front of the engine, the bypass doors will be automatically open and modulate as needed to hold a pressure that is tolerable by the engine. So that the inlet is working to satisfy the engine. And in so doing, they get maximum power out of it. The working inlet on this airplane gives you sea level power at about 80,000 feet, which is tremendous, and that's all due to recovery of the duct. So the inlet system is a number of doors, forward bypass doors, aft bypass doors, and spike.
Mm-hmm.
And those all work in unison to get the engine to be happy. If they get out of whack with what the engine needs, you might suffer what's called an unstart, or an AD, an aerodynamic disturbance, which is a crock. But anyway, that's what somebody called it. We called it an unstart.
Who Who thought of this? I mean, this is such a clever idea.
The inlet?
Yeah, the whole inlet idea to bypass
That was Lockheed, of course. Lockheed was into recovery ducts on lots of airplanes. They've been doing that for a long time, but nothing of this gravity, you know, this serious.
So the idea was the inlet spike moves the shock wave to a point which then is sort of compressed air, which goes in when the bypass opens, it puts this compressed air.
No, the forward bypass door's job is to dump excess pressure in the duct
Right.
overboard of the nacelle. You can see those grills on the outside of the nacelle. Okay, the air bleeds out through those holes on the outside of the nacelle.
Right.
The inlet at times can pack more air than the engine can burn.
Okay.
So if you don't do something about that, you're asking for an unstart or a compressor stall,
Right.
and they end up being ultimately the same thing. Poor operation, and maybe even loss of control.
Well, you could, as I understand, you could sense the unstart happening. I was told you could actually kind of feel it in the inlet ducts or the air conditioning ducts.
The only thing I remember on unstart awareness was if the inlet is running too smooth, no rumble at all, watch out. Also, you have a barber pole on the compressor inlet pressure gauge in the cockpit. That barber pole is positioned by the air data computer and sort of tells you if you get ahead of the barber pole, above it, you're going to unstart. So you want to stay just at the barber pole or just under it. Just under it, the typical inlet has a little bit of a rumble to it. And I'd call that a safe rumble. That's okay. When it gets dead smooth, watch out. You're right on the unstart margin. And the unstart is not fun.
What happens?
Well, the engine basically, normally one engine at a time, not the two together. One engine will compressor stall essentially, which makes it go from producing big thrust to producing nothing. And all of a sudden the airplane wants to go sideways because on one side you got no push, on the other side you got max.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a way to fly.
What's the recovery? What do you do?
Move the spike forward and open the doors.
You don't pull the power back on the other side?
No, you don't have time to mess with that. A lot of unstarts, you get an unstart on one side and you have a sympathetic on the other due to yaw.
Right.
And so the other side, now you got them both dumped. But in recovery, move the spikes forward some, start them forward, open the doors, and it recovers normally right away. It probably blew the AB out. A lot of times it did.
Mm-hmm.
You have to restroke the AB, relight the afterburner.
And how do you, what lit the afterburner?
The chemical ignition system lit the AB and the main engine.
The TEB.
TEB, the triethylborane.
Yeah. How many shots of TEB?
I think there's 16. You can plan on 16 slugs or shots of TEB.
If you shot TEB in there when the burner was already going, what would happen?
Nothing.
Okay.
Just wasted. The only way to give it a shot of TEB is two ways. It's mechanically simple. When you move the throttle from off to idle, it gives you a shot in the forward chambers, like for startup.
Right.
And when you move the throttle from military position and lift it over the ramp into AB, you give it another shot in the afterburner section around the flame holders.
Okay.
So you can't give it a shot without moving the throttle. That's what does it.
Yeah, yeah. What, I want to kind of go backwards here for a minute. The starting procedure. It's just these, people don't think about this very much, but I think it's amazing that you had.
There's no starter on the airplane.
No, but how did you do it? What was the
engine had to be externally cranked.
It
had to be turned.
By two?
Well, the original starter that we had at the area on the A-12, and the only one we ever used on the A-12, was a start cart that had two GM big block V8s in it.
Right.
Originally, I think Buick Wildcat engines, which
Right.
are 455s.
Right.
Later, they put 454 Chevys, which is about the same engine.
Yeah.
But they had two of them in the cart, turning a transmission with a torque shaft that engaged the main engine. So they'd roll the cart under the nacelle and remove a cover, raise the torque shaft and engage it to the accessory drive box of the engine.
Why did it take 800 or 900 horsepower to turn that thing over?
Well, the engine's a big slug. And you're turning not only the engine, you're turning its gearbox too, with its pumps and generators and all that stuff. Everything has to be turned.
Did they use 2 start carts, one on each engine then?
Yes.
Okay, so when you
But
were
you could do it with one, but you'd have to move it from one side to the other.
so when you were starting, it was a deafening deal
it was
going
a beautiful sound. I loved that. That was music. I loved it because when you got to speed on the engine on the start, the engine would outrun the start cart. In other words, it would accelerate away, and turning faster than the start cart could turn it. And about that time, when the cart operator sees that happen, he pulls the throttles off on those big V8s, and they were short stack exhaust system. And God, they would cackle, and you could hear it over the J58. It was beautiful. I loved it.
So where did you? I guess after you've given a signal to run out the engine, then at some point you push the throttle forward and.
Yeah, to start the airplane normally, after you do your pre-start checklist, and you're ready to go and everybody else is ready to go, then on the intercom, you tell the guy who's at the left engine, the guy that's running that cart out there, you just tell him, turn the left. And then he'll say, Roger, or something like that, and pretty soon you'll hear the engine engage and start turning the main. When you see the tack of the J58 move from off, nothing, and start up, at that point you move the throttle from off to idle. That gives you starting fuel and also gives you a shot of TEB. And normally, shortly thereafter, you'll see the EGT start to rise, the exhaust gas temperature. And when it starts up, then it's just a few seconds after that the engine is going on its own and it outruns the start cart. Then before you start the right engine, you do the left engine after start checks, which is the hydraulic system. Of course, check its oil pressure. Do the normal husbandly chores of looking at the engine, the systems.
Yeah.
Move the flight controls. Make sure that the L and A hydraulics, which are the left-hand hydraulic systems, are working and that the controls work. When you're satisfied with that little bit and the pressures are checked, then you tell them to turn the right. And that same procedure goes on the right engine, and it starts much the same. I never ever heard of a false start, hung start, or anything like that. It started every time.
So I should have taken that in order, but maybe I can move around the tape. So now after you're up at altitude, you've climbed, you're basically doing a cruise climb sort of thing, aren't you?
You climb more or less at full bore till you achieve level off, which is achieving 3.2 Mach number in climb.
Right.
Around 2.6 Mach number in the Axle, you come into an area of excess thrust. So to save fuel to use going down the road, we would throttle back about 5,000 pounds per side at about 2.6, 2.526, right in there.
What was your fuel flow?
Level off fuel flow, I remember, was about 19,000 pounds per side to start, and that's begin cruise. On the climb, it was something over 60,000 pounds per side. It burned fuel like crazy.
Jesus.
But
you're climbing because you're getting lighter, maybe.
Well, you level off pretty well at 75,000, where you achieve 3.2.
Right.
The equivalent speed there is 390 knots equivalent.
Right. Okay.
And you can't go by the indicated airspeed indicator. It's out to lunch. It's completely useless at cruise.
Well, how did the equivalent speed of the KEAS, how did that?
It was a digital readout in a little instrument called the TDI, the triple display indicator.
Yeah, I've seen one. We have one in our museum, actually.
Yeah, that little it shows you corrected values, keys, Mach number, and altitude, and where the boiler gauges in the cockpit are probably out to lunch. They don't mean anything.
Well, but your indicated airspeed, I always understood that the airplane flies an indicated airspeed.
It does. But the one you've got, the indicated airspeed indicator in the airplane is a combination Mach meter airspeed indicator like you had on an F4 or anything else.
Well, so at altitude, your keys would be, you said 390.
Keys at, yeah, 390 at initial level off.
But if there was
The indicated airspeed on the regular airspeed indicator is probably 200 knots higher. So it's useless.
200 knots higher?
Reading higher.
Wow.
And there's shock waves standing all over the pitot tube, so it is really out to lunch. You can't use that.
So did you, so at altitude, did you fly it on altitude hold most of the time, or did you just...
No, Mach hold.
Mach hold, so it would just kind of gently go up.
Yeah, and as you got lighter in Mach hold, it'll climb. When you get about as high as you want, if you want to level off there, you don't have to go to altitude hold, just throttle back a little bit and you'll stop the cruise climb.
So what was and the temperature made a big difference?
Yes.
So the colder, the higher you could go?
Well, the temperature at really high altitude, it typically is around -70.
Right.
But it doesn't change going from A to B or anywhere else. It pretty well stays about the same. Yeah. If it changes, and I've seen it, but not often. If the temperature changes, it's normally a rapid change as you move from one slug of air into another. If you're in Mach hold, the airplane's going to make a correction in pitch because the temperature effect on Mach hold, on Mach number, is immediate.
Yeah, okay.
That's the thing that changes Mach number in air, is to change the temperature.
So now when you were flying a mission, when you were flying, like for instance over Korea, you wanted to be at a certain altitude.
Yeah.
Which was it 82,000 in that?
No, we weren't ever, I don't think we ever flew in altitude hold. Never. Mach hold.
Mach hold. So when you're actually...
On climb, keys hold. On descent, keys hold. You had an equivalent airspeed hold position of the autopilot.
But on a mission, didn't you want to be at if you were going to fly...
Keep climbing.
Well, as high as you can get.
Yeah.
So if you go to 95...
Within reason.
So what was the highest you ever got?
86,000 on you mean on a mission?
On any mission.
Well, on test ops, 88.
Wow.
Close to 89.
Yeah.
But that's at home, just flying or somewhere else flying a test op.
What was the highest?
Actual, on overflight missions, I think the highest I got was 86. And the thing was still climbing, but I was done with my mission, and after that I just throttled back a little bit, and you know, you're no longer over denied territory, you're going home. So
speaking of what we talked about a little while ago, what is it, the old question, what does it feel like to be at 86,000 feet? Are there sensations that you've thought about in the past that you can relate?
Yeah, not much. I think the most notable thing I can remember about high speed and high altitude was flying the thing at night. Because of what we had a thing we call fireflies. There was must have been some dust or something that was incandescing as it hits the windscreen. And it's kind of funny. I'd never seen that before. And you see these little streaks. It's like driving your car in the rain where you're only getting one drop of rain at a time, you know, like under a thunderstorm at the beginning. You've seen those. Well, it's the same kind of a thing, except it's an incandescing, it's a little flicker of bright light at night. And you really notice that. And you may have a whole flurry of it. I don't know what it is, dust or micrometeorite, I don't know what the hell it is. But it was notable.
It's kind of like San Elmo's fire, but little drops.
No, you were running down dust, I was told.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
You're running down something, and when it struck the windshield, it lit. It lit up. And the other thing I liked was looking at the afterburner plume. Through the little periscope that's in the top of the canopy, you can look back and see your ABs at night, and they're gorgeous. They're big blue flames hanging back behind the airplane, at least as long as the airplane. They're gorgeous.
So you had a periscope above and a periscope below as well?
Yeah, the downward looking view scope. Yeah, but you had that little periscope that was in the top of the canopy, and you could poke it up It could be retracted, or you
Right.
push it up and you can move it left and right and look left engine, right engine, left
Yeah.
rudder, so on.
Which
I normally left that little thing up all the time.
so, okay, these are questions from an SR-71 pilot.
Okay.
Did you ever have to use military thrust and just having to tap a burner during air refueling?
Yeah. Yeah, after you got about half a load of fuel on board, you became power limited, but both engines in mill was not enough to stay on the boom. So I used to light the left AB at min, and that left the throttle as closest to your left leg, if you will, to be maneuvered in the military range, you know, less than military, to hold position on the boom. But yeah, we had to stroke the burner in order to maintain position for refueling.
How much time do you think you would spend on the boom? 6 to 10 minutes?
No, about 20 minutes. If you were really light when you got to the tanker, like say 6,000 or 8,000 pounds, maybe 8,000, yeah, it'd take you 20 minutes on there.
So, and you're refueling in the mid-30s somewhere?
30,000. We refueled higher than the SR because we didn't pick up near as much fuel. He had capability of 80,000 pounds. We were full at 68,000.
Did the tanker have to push over any for you?
No.
They did in the SR apparently. They had to
Yeah,
push
they
over.
had a toboggan for him because he's a lot bigger and
Yeah.
heavier.
So after you come off the burner now, or when you come off the tanker, then you just
Stroke the other burner and neutralize the rudder and accelerate away.
and go back to the same climb schedule you did before.
Yep.
And now when you get up to, did you have a checklist on your knee the whole time? So you're
I didn't. I had one. I don't know where it was. It was in the cockpit somewhere.
so most people just did it on, haven't done it.
Yeah,
so-
once you're happy with your airplane, you've flown it for a while, you don't need a checklist.
Yeah, you've flown.
I use a checklist more in that airplane than I did in any airplane I've ever flown. I did that. Pre-start, many steps, a lot of fiddling around with the INS, and stuff that I'd never used before.
That must have been one of the first airplanes to have INS.
I don't know, it's the first one I ever flew that
Yeah, 'cause
INS.
when I flew the F4D model, and I never heard of inertial. Well, of course you wouldn't in pilot training hear about INS. Inertial navigation system is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How accurate was it for you guys?
Not good. The GPS you've got in your fishing boat's way more accurate than what we had.
Yeah.
I think spec was like a half a mile or something like that of actual position. It did fairly well. I was surprised at how well it did at times. It has some sort of a sequence it goes through and gets accurate and then less accurate at other times. I don't know what that term is, but I didn't worry about it. It always got me, most of the time, got me where I wanted to go.
So now when you're up at altitude, to be out of sequence again here, you're up at altitude, you got your spacesuit on, basically. What's your range of visibility? Can you look up straight overhead?
No, you can't see anything overhead because the top of the canopy is solid. It's metal. So you got the two side glass. You can't see out the front either, to speak of. It's difficult to see anything out of that airplane.
Well, it has did it have the split windshield like the
Yeah.
SR?
Sure, exactly the same.
And then did it have the problem with the stuff in the glass sort of melting?
Sealant?
Yeah, so you'd have problems seeing it.
Yes. The sealant tended to melt out,
Yeah.
and they'd shave it. They'd use a razor cutter, and the stuff would flow back on the glass, and the crew chief would clean it up, you know, and then when it got too bad, they'd have to pull the windshield and reseal it and put it back in. And it was just a silicone type of high temperature sealant.
So up at altitude though, you look out and you can definitely see the curvature of the Earth.
Sure.
And was it bright blue up above and then getting black as you look
Above
back?
about 60,000, 65,000, it starts getting dark above. And you can see stars in
Wow.
broad daylight,
Wow.
bright ones.
Wow. And I guess I had the occasion to be flying directly away from the sun at sunset. And I was at 35,000 feet or whatever it was, and I was looking out, and you get this tunnel effect, and I finally realized what it was. It was the shadow of the Earth going off into space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you must have really seen that from high altitude.
We didn't do a lot of flying at sundown, I don't think. We flew at night once in a while, mainly to maintain a capability of ferrying at night.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really have a night mission. Our cameras were daytime cameras.
Oh, right.
So
Well, you didn't have all the electronic gee whiz stuff that the SR had.
No, we only had one single camera,
Yeah.
mainly the Perkin-Elmer camera,
And it was the basic,
Type 1.
and apparently a better camera than the SR because it was small.
Much higher resolution,
Right.
much longer focal length.
And you had various targets around the United States you could overfly just to see.
Yeah, we had prepared targets, which were painted contrast targets on top of buildings and hangars all over the country. We'd fly over those all the time just for something to do and check the resolution of the camera.
But now that you're laying down a supersonic boom all over the country, why isn't it that you can't hear it very well?
It's too high. The pressure at the surface, from 85,000, even though you're making a wave, is still quite low because you're so far away.
Was it
16, 17 miles up.
Did you have to debrief the start-stop altitudes for contrails?
I don't think anybody paid any attention to it.
That was a big deal with the SR-71, I think. They had to pay attention to where contrails were starting.
Somebody was worried about it. We didn't.
Were your operational sorties radio silent from engine start to landing?
Pretty much. Yeah, we didn't use the radio in refueling. We talked to the tanker, but only after we got on the boom.
So now when you flew out of Cadina, I think you had 5 missions, 5
Mm-hmm.
operational missions,
Mm-hmm.
and those were Korea and North Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did you know when it was time to, you've started engines, how did you know when it was time to leave, to taxi, take off and all that?
Well, they gave us a takeoff time to shoot for.
Okay.
So we'd taxi in time to make that, maybe have a minute or two sitting at the end of the runway.
Did you get a light or flash or flare?
No, we talked to the tower.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh yeah, we talked to the tower, sure. We talked to our ground support guys, on the
Right.
intercom,
Sure.
because they would plug in when we got out to the runway for run up. The lead guy in that troop would plug into the airplane, and he had headphones on, and we could talk to him.
What was your call sign?
It varied from one mission to the next. Operational missions had a unique call sign for every one. They were all different.
And how about the Dutch 20 call sign you have? What is
The
that?
Dutch call signs were the at home in the States assigned calls, and they were personal.
Okay.
All A-12 pilots were Dutch, and the number was significant as to who it was. I was Dutch 20.
And the SR guys were Hubbard, right?
Aspen and some others, I don't remember what.
Yeah, I think more uses Habu, H-A-B-U,
Abu.
because that was the black snake,
Yeah. I thought they used that overseas more than,
Well, maybe they didn't.
I don't know.
Well, I already asked this, but what was your average level off altitude, and was it hard altitude or did you cruise climb?
Typically you'd intercept cruise Mach number at 75,000. So you'd climb up, accelerating as you went. And when you got to 75, you'd make a major power reduction to more or less level off to cruise speed and power. So you pull back mostly on fuel flow. We just reduce throttle to about, as I remember, about 19,000 pounds per side for cruise. And then when you later on, when you cruise climb maybe 10,000 to up to around 85,000 or something for an hour at 3.2.
Really?
Yep.
And it's about 2,200, I guess.
2,100, yeah.
And his question is, other than Cuban sorties, which there weren't,
We never did Cuba.
did you fly any operational missions from the United States?
No,
Did the A-12 ever deploy to England?
no.
And then the next one, did any A-12 pilots have visual sightings of SA-2 firings?
Yes.
And when were those? I know we talked about that, but you talked
Those
about it
those were over North Vietnam.
again. But you didn't. You yourself were lucky on that.
I got raw indications that they were getting ready to do something nasty.
RAW stands for.
Radar homing and warning. But they never did to me.
Did the so now one fellow did have as many as 6 missiles fired at him.
Denny, on one mission, on one leg, he had 6 SA-2s shot at him.
When would that be? Let's see. When did they fly? When did they start flying over North Vietnam?
May '67, I think, was the first flight.
And the last flight?
The last flight, last operational mission for the A-12 was over North Korea, and it was May '68.
Okay.
And that was Jack Layton's. He flew the last operational mission. And it was North Korea.
Well, you must have flown the second to last one then.
Well, I flew the second North Korea overflight.
Right.
But there was that was in February or
Right.
something in '68. Yeah,
Right.
we had some more North Vietnam routine, overflights after my Korean thing.
Well, so there weren't. Did I read a total of 57 operational missions or something like that?
I don't know.
The
There was 2,800 and something total A-12 flights of all kinds, test hops and everything.
no, this. Operational missions were called Black Shield missions.
Let me get my glasses. Hold
Okay.
on. Yeah, Black Shield was the code name given for the operation in the Far East. Yeah.
So I see the mission. You have one there from. Well, let's talk about how many times did you overfly North Vietnam? Or do you recall?
I don't know, 4 or 5?
Okay. Did you ever see the pictures?
No.
What?
I take that back. At the end of the program, when the Director of Central Intelligence called for the pilots to come see him in Washington,
Who was that at the time?
Helms,
Okay.
we all flew back and he wanted to say thank you. And we flew back to the CIA headquarters and they had a bit of a briefing prepared for him. And it showed some of our highlight missions, and he was very cordial about the whole thing, but that was the only time I think I ever saw any of the take.
Well, if the thing of the pictures taken though, they weren't developed there. I mean, there was
No.
quite a process to get them developed.
On the first missions, the film was flown all the way back to New York, to
Wow.
Rochester, or wherever the heck Kodak was, to process the film.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, when they equipped the Recce Tech outfit at Yokota, I think it was in Japan, they could do it. So, but still, the film had to be downloaded and flown normally by C-130 up to the 67th Reconnaissance Tech Squadron, and they would process it, and I don't know who had to do the distribution of it. It wasn't me. All I did, I got to fly. I didn't ever see it.
Now, when you're actually going to make a camera run, I mean, I know you had 3 different kinds of cameras, but you talked about one, and
We only used one camera operationally.
it was fairly simple. I mean, it basically standby, warm up, and on.
Yeah, well, you had a couple of positions. You had a normal position, an emergency position of the camera, and another one called cloud setting. And you ran the camera normal, in the normal switch position, if all was as briefed. if you got there and you deemed it was more cloud than briefed, like 50% cloud or something, you'd go to the CL position on the camera controller.
Wonder what it did.
It took out the normal velocity over height computation, which is input by the INS and the altimeter and stuff to know how fast you're going. It knew, the airplane system knew how fast you were going, how high you were, your bank angle, knew all of those things.
And it reported it somehow or another.
It was, each frame had that information along with the position information, speed,
Well,
date.
wasn't there a monitoring agency that kind of kept track of where the flights were?
No,
Because I think, but how
no.
do
The only thing that anybody knew where we were was when our bird watcher, which is our telemetry system,
that's what I meant.
the bird watcher would sing. It didn't give position. If you were on track, on target, and doing your A code, you know, when you should be, they knew where you were, because if you were doing what they said on the film strip to do, you would strike and hit the A code button on the bird watcher, and it would chirp. It would sing, and they'd get this HF signal to the ground stations. Then they'd know where you were. But there was no tracking us. I think the best tracking that was done was our intercept of the unfriendly radars reporting.
Wow.
They would report to their headquarters and stuff, and some of our stations were snooping that information.
Oh, wow, really?
So we were using their air defense network as our FAA.
Well, so, okay, now the airplane could take a lot of pictures. I mean, it took, as I recall, 2,500 miles worth of pictures, 75
Yeah.
miles wide.
Yeah, we never did that though. We'd run it for a minute or two and then turn it off.
So how long were you, if you were overflying North Vietnam, let's say you're coming from east to west, it's not, you don't go you're only going to be taking pictures for 2 or 3 minutes, right?
That's it.
And then you fly out over the coast on the opposite side, I suppose, or do you? Where do
We kept the camera on before we were over the target, and we kept it on after the main interest portion, you know, of the run, and then we'd go to standby on it.
So now you're at altitude, you're Mach 3.2, and you're at 80,000 feet or whatever.
Yeah.
And now you want to go back and you want to go the opposite direction. You've been going east, now you want to go west.
Normally you'd go to after the first pass, you'd go to a tanker. In the case of North Vietnam, we were quite a ways from home. We were 1,800 miles from home.
Right.
So we didn't have enough fuel to make 2 passes, you know, like do a 180 and go back over the target again without going to a tanker first. So we'd fly through on pass number 1 and then go descend to a tanker, fill up, and then reclimb back out and go back and run on a different track usually.
So you refuel over Thailand?
Yes,
Okay.
normally.
Okay. And so it'd be about an hour difference on their way back, I guess.
Yeah, about an hour from the first time you went. You go back over again. Yeah, about
So
that.
those missions were 5-6 hours?
3.5 to 4 is a rule.
Now, later on, so you flew several missions over Vietnam, and then the Pueblo gets captured.
Yeah.
And was it late December, early January of '68?
January of '68 is right. And we flew, the first mission was flown by Jack Weeks, and he was over Wonsan Harbor about 2 days after the capture of the boat.
And then you flew over it a few days later.
I flew it a month later or something, in February.
So he went to, they were trying to figure out where the boat was, right?
Yeah, they found it on the first mission very well and photographed it. On the second mission, I think it was moved or something. But we still did repeated passes over the country. We weren't just after the boat, we were after whatever we could get in a couple, 3 passes.
So potential targets, perhaps?
Military targets.
Okay, but you didn't know ECM type information.
They did not detect us.
So you didn't have any raw gear warnings at all?
No warning at all. It was dead quiet. And I am told that the Chinese were tracking us and told the North Koreans
Yeah.
that you were being had, but I don't think they ever saw us. They never lit up the light one. Nothing ever went on.
Did you have that little small raw gear about that thing?
No. All we had was those lights that are above the viewfinder shield, the glare shield.
Oh, wow.
There's a set of lights above there, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And that would show the rough direction of a threat,
Right.
and whether they launched or not was indicated by the LI lights.
Right.
And then if the jammers worked right, you'd get the big light come on, jam green.
So now the fellow that had them fired at him, he knew they had been fired, did he take any evasive action?
No, he kept going.
He just figured speed was good enough, I guess.
And the raw gear and the countermeasure system we had was pretty smart.
Yeah, Mike, well, you've seen that tape.
He might have been had it not worked.
Yeah.
And his was alive, everything was going.
And when Maury was talking about being fired at, what he did is he just turned. He said they could detect that they had been seen, that the Vietnamese would sometimes simulate that they had fired, but he said they could tell that the missile was talking back in steering. It would send a signal that said turn left, and it would say, okay, I'm turning left. So when they do that, then
They have a beacon on it. The missile has a beacon.
Right.
The uplink command from the ground station to the missile is talking to that beacon.
Right.
Then the beacon responds with certain information.
Yeah, he said, but that's how they knew that it had been fired, actually fired.
Yeah.
So he looked out, he saw it coming up, and then
Yeah.
he turned towards it, to solve the solution, or
Yeah.
to
We were directed to just keep going.
yeah. Well, he said also that when he got back on the ground, they knew because of Skywatcher or Birdwatcher or whatever it was that
They didn't have a bird watcher on the SR.
Yeah, he had something. Because
They have a recorder.
Well, they knew he was off track.
Yeah.
So they came and said, "Well, how come you turned early?" And he said, "Well, they fired a missile at me." So there was a big
Yeah.
flap about that.
Yeah. I wouldn't have turned had they launched. I still wouldn't have turned. I would have just trusted the EWS.
I might push the throttles up a little further.
You're already at the limit.
Yeah.
You're there. You can push the throttles up, but the airplane, you can't do anything.
Was it one of the limiting factors, the temperature, the inlet temperature?
Inlet temperature is the limiting factor of the airplane.
And what was the number on that?
427 compressor inlet temperature. That's a limit.
That's pretty darn hot for just compressed air when you think about it.
That's it. You hadn't seen a fire yet.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Well, do you want to talk about flying over Korea? Was there much to it besides just doing it?
Nah, it was a simple mission. They told us that expect a good response. In other words, probably a lot of missile activity.
Right.
And we were all surprised to find none.
Yeah.
They didn't even know we were there. So they didn't do anything, and they did raise the minimum penetration altitude prior. The North Vietnam penetration, min-pen, was 75,000, which, what the hell, you got to 75,000 an hour before you got there. So that wasn't hard to make. Not on the first pass. Second pass coming out of Thailand could be a little more dicey about getting to altitude because the distance
Got more gas.
from off tanker to first camera run is pretty close. But the min penetration for North Korea, was up to 80,000. They jumped it up 5,000 feet. Still had no trouble getting there,
Yeah.
none at all.
Yeah.
A lot of SR missions I knew were flown in the 70s because they just didn't have the capability to get any higher.
So now you told me a little while ago that you thought that overall the A-12 was a better airplane, the SR.
Yeah, I think by design, it's typical of the first model of a lot of things. You don't get better by loading it up more, adding more sensors, adding weight, adding fuel. All these things detract from the handling qualities of an airplane. So the A-12 was the original design. The basis for all the other ones, of course, was the A-12. And it was considerably lighter, simpler, less automated, which required a bit more of the pilot, I think, especially in those days.
Was one of the reasons for the SR because they could put a back seat around it, you think?
Multi-sensor was the reason for the SR.
Yeah.
And then when you had to have somebody to run it, then it dictated another guy.
Well, there was a big political battle between the CIA and the USAF as well, too.
Only about everybody trying to get rid of the A-12. There was no battle before they said the A-12's got to go to bed.
Well, the A-12, I mean, you guys went to Cadina prior to
Sure.
the SR, but then you stayed for a while where they were...
We overlapped them and covered for them in their early first few missions.
Right.
They were concerned that maybe they would have an abort for some reason and we would back them up. So we did back them up.
So did
But we never had to fly. They went.
So you must have briefed together and...
No,
No?
no. We knew, we briefed our mission. It was basically the same as theirs.
Well, how
We
many-
would fly the same tracks as theirs, but we didn't brief together. We never saw those guys.
So when you were there at Cadina, they had 4 airplanes there, as I recall.
We had 3.
3, okay. And then
3.
When you had, but they were, okay, so you had 3. How many SRs were there?
I think they had 4,
Okay.
but we only had 3.
And they were all housed in separate hangars, I guess.
They had each cell. Yeah, we had 4. We had 4 hangars, 3 with A-12s in them, and the 101s. We had 2 101s over there for a while, chases.
Okay.
And we lost one of them. The weatherman dinged it, crashed it, and was killed. So we had one 101 that was in the other cell.
So now let's get to the point, you're about time to come home. And because of the politics that were going on, they decided to quit funding the A-12. They wanted the last airplane home around May 16th or something like that.
Yeah.
And they were going to shut the program down in June, I think. And
Yeah.
so everybody was flying them back to Area 51.
Well, we only had 3 airplanes.
Okay.
127, 129, and 131.
And
Those airplanes were the same ones that went over at the beginning of Black Shield. Those 3 airplanes went over. We lost 129 on a test top prior to its being returned to the States.
and you had actually flown the airplane a couple days before on a test op, haven't you?
I flew it, yeah, I flew it on what was to have been its final test op, and after that, if everything was okay, it was going to go home.
What was the matter with it?
I had a problem with the right engine. It would not go into bypass as it should. It was late going into bypass. It was like Mach 3. Should have done it at 2.4, 2.5, somewhere in there. And that was a failure of the fuel control to get that job done. It's normally signaled to do that at 2.4, 2.5. And I squawked it, and on return, and then after it did finally get into bypass, it ran fine. And on the decel, it would not come out of bypass, whatever the hell was bugging it, wouldn't let it come out of bypass. So as I slowed down, the engine compressor stalled and quit because it was stuck in bypass. And when it got down to about Mach 2, it didn't like that either. So it just barfed and quit. And when I decelerated to subsonic, I tried it, I relit it to see if it would light up, and it lit up fine. So I came back and landed with 2 engines operating, and I wrote it up. Jack Weeks and I were the 2 guys on station at that time. There was only 2 pilots there with 3 airplanes, and we were doing the test stops, getting them ready to come home. And so Weeks flew the second test stop on 129, And from the only indications we have is what the bird watcher said was going on, the telemetry. And apparently the right engine failed, and catastrophically probably, the best guess, is that the engine came apart. And they had changed that engine. That wasn't the same engine I had written up. They took another known good engine out of a can and put it in there to fly it, and it failed.
And so they never did find the airplane or anything.
They never found anything of Weeks or the airplane, nothing.
And
They had the last thing they had, of course, was the bird watcher chirping over temp, then low altitude, low below 70,000. So it was coming down.
So what was the eject? Well, but you can't tell how fast or whether the airplane was intact or whatever.
We knew that he gave an A code at the beginning of the turn on that test op route.
Meaning A code meaning.
The A code is a signal that I'm okay. It forces the bird watcher to chirp the A code,
Okay.
which is one of the sensor trips.
Right.
So he gave the A code at the start turn, and he wouldn't have done that if he was off altitude or it wasn't working right or unstarted or any other thing. So it was okay at start turn. And by timing, about 5 minutes later, he would be about the apex of the turn and complete that turn and head for home. The bird watcher started signaling over temp and then low altitude and then repeat over temp and then nothing. And apparently the airplane came apart. Best guess right there.
So they had a C-130 search and rescue organization.
They had a major search and rescue effort up. They even had the SRs participated. They were there at the time, and they went down and did wide area photography of the area, seeing if they could find something. And they never did. And nor did anybody else.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, one of the airplanes on station 127 flew home in 5 hours and 5 minutes or something like that, all the way with not a problem. And then 131, the last airplane, started out with Ken Collins for home, and I was in the tanker.
Well, you were trying to get a speed record going home, were you?
No, we were just trying to get home.
Well, one of the things I read said they ended up with a speed record after all.
Well, with Sullivan, but not with 131. It took
it was a speed record. It took 5.5 days.
We took 11 days
11
with
days.
131, yeah. But you could have put a sail on it and got it home quicker, I think. It broke everywhere it could.
Oh, man.
It broke, and we went in Wake Island with it. And then Ken went home to Weeks' funeral or memorial service, and I stayed with 131 at Hickam, and it took 3 tries to get that pig to go home finally.
You know, when you went into a place like Hickam, I mean, Hickham's a civilian airport. What did you do?
It's a joint use, it's military base too.
People must have just, unless you flew in at night, I mean.
No, we were there during the day.
People must have been just aghast to see this thing. I mean, they're not little.
Oh, yeah.
They're not little airplanes.
No, nobody made a big deal
I mean,
of
you go
it.
down the runway, you turn left, and you go back at Hickam.
Yeah,
It's got a huge ramp.
but by this time, the SR has been announced as being an entity and all that. This is 68.
Yeah.
So most people looking at it can't tell the difference between an SR and an
That's
A-12.
true. What is I still have never been quite clear on this whole story about the SR versus the RS versus, you know, this.
Well, according to the things I've read, the books I've read, President Johnson misnomered
Yeah.
the name of the airplane. It was supposed to be RS-71.
Right.
And you know, the B-70 by this time had been called RS-70, Reconnaissance Strike.
Right.
But he got it twisted around, a little dyslexic, I guess, and he said SR, so they went and changed all the books and called it an SR.
He's the president.
Yeah, he can do it. He
Now
did it.
Now the difference between the A-11 and the A-12, that's another one that was confusing to read.
A-11 is a misnomer. There never was an A-11 built.
Right.
There was an A-11 in Kelly's plan going from A-1 to A-12.
Right.
But basically A-11 was an A-12 without chines. with a cylindrical fuselage.
Do you know what was in the chines?
The chines was an anti-radar
Yeah.
development. It was one of the things they went through in order to give them the housing, you know, to mount the
Right.
transparent panels and to reduce the bistatic response. I have an interesting piece back here I'd like to show you. I have a piece of Elevon trailing edge that came off the airplane in Mobile. And the reason I got that was that during Katrina, during that
Right.
hurricane, they had a huge wall of water go through the storage building at Mobile where the A-12 is housed. And this wall of water came through and pushed a wall down in this building and pushed the A-12 back into the girders, damaging trailing edges of the Elevon. One spike was also badly damaged when a 51 in the same building was pushed into the nacelle of the A-12. But the guys down there gave me a piece of that thing, and you want me to go get it?
No, let's look at it in a minute. You want to talk about the A-1 a little bit?
A-1?
The A-1. You went
Yeah.
from the fastest airplane to the slowest
I
fixed wing
did.
airplane.
I did.
How in the world did that happen?
Volunteer.
Really?
Now, when I got back into the Air Force at the end of Oxcart, I rejoined the Air Force, got my commission back, and rejoined the Air Force, and went on.
As a captain, major? What?
I was a major
Okay.
at that time, and I had a 2-year duty and travel restriction because of Oxcart, my involvement with Oxcart. They didn't want me going anywhere for 2 years. No combat area, you know, anywhere. So
You wouldn't exactly make a good prisoner, would you?
well, they didn't want me singing or something.
No,
I got captured right away and tell them what I knew
Sure.
about Oxcart.
Right.
So living with that, I was happy to get back in the Air Force, number one. Number two, I was red hot for Southeast Asia assignment because my record showed that I'd never been there.
Right.
I had never, you know, I was out. I was out of the Air Force, so I wasn't in the combat zone. So anyway,
And you probably
my friends.
Could you tell them?
No, I couldn't tell him.
You mean you couldn't tell the Air Force?
Was not surfaced yet. Oxcart was not surfaced at all until '82.
So
This
in
is
other words,
'68.
So you leave the Air Force, and they don't know why you've left.
No,
And now
'68. I went back in.
you go back in again, and well, I mean, somebody does the paperwork, right? I mean,
Yeah, but
somebody knew what was going on.
my records show that I was assigned to the Pentagon in the years I was on Oxcart.
Oh, I get it.
So
And you couldn't say, oh, and by the way,
I didn't say anything. It was a very strange situation.
But
I
they
couldn't
waited.
tell anybody anything.
But they waited for 2 or 3 years before you went, because you didn't go to like 71, right?
I went over in '70.
70, okay.
Yeah, 2 years after Oxcart was over, I had a volunteer statement in before that.
Right.
And I had friends who had flown in Southeast Asia in A-1s, and they were touting the mission and said it was great, and you ought to try that. And I thought about it about 2 seconds, and I decided they're right. I want to do something different. And the search and rescue role, which was
Sandy.
the main thing, you know, the Sandy A-1s are they're the guns for the Jolly Green, you know.
Yeah,
we
sure.
guard the Jolly so he can do his job of getting people
Right.
out. So I wanted to do that, and I did that. So I went over in '70 and '71 and flew a tour in the slowest thing in the theater, just about. But that was a great mission and a good results.
They had 67 missions, I think.
Yeah.
So, and those missions were pretty long too, weren't they?
Yeah, 3-4 hours. And when at NKP, when I got there was 2 squadrons. There had been 3,
Yeah.
but they were down to 2, and within a month or 2 of my time at NKP, they got it down to 1 squadron. And they just got rid of the airplanes, gave the Vietnamese the extra airplanes, and away we went.
So you were flying just mostly they were using a fact to tell you where to go, and did you sit alert?
On strike,
Yeah.
yeah, but our main mission was SAR, search and rescue. So we were with the Jollies.
So, and you do, because I think, wasn't it Firefly flew at night and Sandy flew during the day? Was that what it was?
No, Firefly was one of the squadron call signs.
Okay.
Firefly, Hobo, that's the squadron I
Yeah.
was in. It was a fun airplane. I had a good time with that.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I ended up commander of the squadron. Otherwise, I had probably 100 missions, but
Oh, I see.
I had to
Yeah.
go to all the damn meetings and everything else. When all the fun flying was going on, I was defending the squadron's butt at the stand-up.
What happened after, so you get out, when did you actually get out of the service then?
77.
Okay, so you had another 6 years to go, so what'd you do?
I had, 6 or 7.
What'd you do?
I went flying in a test squadron down in Florida,
Testing.
testing air defense weapons.
Go back to the 101 again?
101, T-Bird, 102.
How'd you like flying the 102?
I didn't really check out. We had them in the squadron, and I was the commander down there, so I got to fly whatever the hell I wanted. But I wasn't primary crew in anything but the 101.
Tell me about the last flight in the A-12. I think that was my favorite story of your things you wrote.
The last flight?
Your last flight.
Yeah, you mean to storage?
Yes.
Well, again, it was 131. I finished all of the flights. The last 4 or 5 flights on that airplane were by me, trying to get the damn thing home. And then,
By the way, when you refer to numbers, it's preceded by article, isn't it? Article
Yeah.
131. That's
the Lockheed number. We didn't use the tail numbers
Yeah.
of the airplanes. We never did. We just called them by their article number, but normally just shortened to the 3-digit thing. Stella will get that. The final flight of any consequence was from Hickam back to 51, and I took it home, and then they downloaded the sensitive equipment that was still on the airplane.
How long did it take from Hickam?
2 hours total. You know, diddling around with the top-off tanker and all of that.
What was the fastest from Cadina, do you know?
5 hours and 5 minutes, I think. Denny Sullivan.
Yeah.
I have a postmarked envelope that he carried back that was postmarked when he left down there, and then postmarked again when he arrived at the area. And he got there before he left. Because the date time group shows another day.
Yeah.
You know, but he left on one day and got back here on the day before. But anyway, that's another story. But I have that in the scrapbook, which I will show you in a little while.
So you're flying back from, so now you fly from...
No, I just brought it back to the area.
Right.
Finally,
Right.
after three attempts.
Right.
Then it kept breaking this same fuel line. And they finally had to change the engine and the gearbox at Hickam.
Vibrations, you think?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Misalignment of the shaft
Right.
between the what do they call it, airframe mounted accessory box, AMAD, accessory drive, AMAD. Between the AMAD, which is the accessory case, is not mounted on the engine.
Right.
It's mounted in the nacelle. The engine's above it.
Yeah.
And the two connect together with the shaft. Anyway, that was out of tolerance vibration. They finally found it, changed both of those items, and the engine ran good. And on the way back, the EGT clock quit on that engine completely, just a connection somewhere. So I just matched up the fuel flow with the other side and came home.
Yeah.
Heck with it. But when I got it to the area, they had it for a day and a night while they downloaded ECM and stuff like that they wanted to take out of the airplane before it went into storage at Palmdale.
They took the cameras out too, right?
Camera was taken out over there.
Okay.
Yeah, we just had ballast.
Okay.
And so the launch for Palmdale was to be done in the dark so that they didn't want this airplane seen. So I took off about 5 in the morning at the area in the dark and flew down to Palmdale. And they did something nice at that time and allowed the families, children, wives, the other pilots, everybody, to go out to Palmdale and be there at the hangar in Site 2 where I parked the thing after landing. So when I got there, I made a couple of passes and an afterburner go around just to thrill the kids, you know, and all that stuff. Right in front of them, just lit it off, and it was light, and just motored on up.
It must have straight on. It must have went straight up.
It did. It ran good. And then I landed, and the family got to see it from close by. And trouble was, we didn't know pictures. Nobody thought to take a picture there. That was a missed opportunity. Would have been a great picture.
Nobody had their cell phones that day, huh?
No cell phones, no, and we should have said, take a picture.
Sure.
Somebody would have taken a picture,
Yeah.
but we didn't. But anyway, that was the end of that was the last flight of an A-12 anywhere. And it was, the airplane was green when I parked it, nothing wrong.
And then they put them in hangars, and they stayed in hangars for quite a while, didn't they?
Yeah, about 15, 20